The rain came sideways that afternoon,
above
the
May's
kind of
diner.
November cold
The
that didn't
M
care about
flickering
umbrellas.
like a tired eyelid.
Dale Marsden sat
11:40
on
on
a
a
Thursday
Thursday
night in the Ozark Hills, watching the parking lot turn to rivers. His kind of late October cold that settled into your knuckles.
His bike stood
stayed.
15 feet away,
Fog
already
pooled in
soaked.
the low places
He'd
along
ridden
Route
through
65.
worse.
He
And
just
the only
wasn't in a
sounds were
hurry
the
to ride
wheeze
through
of
it
the
again.
coffee maker,
Keller's
distant
sat at the
rumble of
edge
a
of
motorcycle
Garner, North
climbing
Carolina,
the grade from the south.
one of those towns that had grown
Jolene
just
Breyer
enough to
wiped
get a
down
dollar
the
store
counter
for
for
the
the
third
chain
time,
pharmacy,
though it
but
was
not
already
enough to
clean.
lose its single
Her hands
stoplight.
needed something to do.
Dale had passed through 100
Bree
towns
was
like it
asleep in
over
the back
40 years
office
of
on the
writing.
old couch.
They
May
blurred
kept
together
there,
after a
wrapped
while.
in the quilt
The
that
same
Jolene had
faded
bought
brick
at the
the
Goodwill
same
in
church
Harrison.
steeples,
The same
yellow,
old men on
with
benches
small white
outside the hardware
flowers.
store.
Bree had
He'd
chosen
stopped
it
here for
because
gas
yellow
and
was the
stayed for
color
the
of the
rain,
house she kept
which was
drawing.
about as much plan
A
as
house
he
with
ever
a
had
fence
these
and a
days.
garden and a
The
door
school bus
that
pulled
locked
up at
from the
3:42.
inside. They'd been at
Dale
May's
watched
for
without
5
watching.
months now.
The way you
5
do when
months
you've
of
got nowhere to be.
$2.13 an hour.
Kids spilled out
plus
in a
tips
chaos of
powdered
backpacks and
eggs in the
shouting,
morning,
most
and
of them
whatever.
running for the grocery
Didn't sell at
store
night.
or the covered bus
Of a
shelter
rented room
across
above
the
the
street.
hardware store with a
One
hot
didn't
plate
run.
and a view
A
of the
small
parking
girl,
lot.
6 or 7,
5 months
stepped
of
off
Jolene
last and stood
watching
at the
every
edge of the
truck that
sidewalk,
pulled in,
looking up at the
every
sky
face
like
she
she was
didn't
doing math in
recognize,
her head.
every
She had a
Oklahoma
purple
plate that
raincoat
wandered
but
this
no
far
hood
east.
up, and she
5
clutched
months
a broken
of not
umbrella.
breathing right.
The fabric
The
torn loose
motorcycle
from
pulled
2
into
of
the lot,
spokes,
and
flapping
Jolene
useless
felt
in
her
the
shoulders
wind.
tighten.
She tried to
before
open
she
it
saw
anyway.
it was him.
The thing
The old
inverted
guy,
immediately,
the quiet one,
and she stood
the
there
Thursday
holding the
regular.
wreckage, rain
Monk,
streaming
they
down her
called him,
face.
though
Dale
Jolene
looked
didn't
away.
know if that was a
Not
name
his
or a
business,
description.
not his kid.
He came in every
He
week
looked
at the
back.
same time.
She
Ordered
was
coffee
walking
and
now,
pie,
heading down
left a
Main
$10
Street
bill
with that
on a
determined
$4
trudge
check,
children have when
and
they
never
know
said
something
more
is
than
hard,
6 words.
but haven't learned yet
He
that
wore the
they're
leather
allowed to
vest
complain
with the
about
patches,
it.
Iron
The umbrella
Horseman
dragged
MC,
behind
Missouri
her,
Charter.
forgotten.
And he had the
Hell,
kind of face that
Dale
had seen
muttered.
things it didn't
He
talk
left his
about.
coffee on the window ledge
She poured
and
his
stepped
coffee
into the
before he
rain.
sat down.
She heard his
He
boots
nodded.
before she saw him.
That was their
He
routine.
watched her shoulders tighten.
Pie tonight?
Watched her not turn
Apple,
around.
if there's any
Smart
left.
kid, he thought.
She cut him a
Knew not
slice,
to engage
slid
with
it across the
strangers.
counter.
He slowed his
He ate
pace,
slowly,
kept his
methodically,
distance, let her
the
stay
way a
ahead.
man eats when he's
Hey,
in no hurry
he
to
called
be
out,
anywhere else.
keeping his voice flat. and
Jolene went
unhurried.
back to wiping
You're getting
things
soaked.
that didn't need wiping.
Now she turned.
And the quiet settled
looked
between
him over
them
with that
like an old
unsettling
blanket.
clarity children
She
have
learned
before
not to
adults
ask customers
teach them
about
to be
themselves.
polite about their
Questions
assessments.
went both
She
directions.
saw the leather
and
vest,
every
the
time
great
someone
beard,
asked her where she
the
was
size of
from,
him.
or how
She
long
didn't
she'd been in
flinch.
town, or whether
My
that
umbrella
was her
broke,
little girl
she
sleeping
said.
in the back.
I saw that.
Jolene felt the ground.
She considered
shift
him for
beneath
another
her
moment.
feet. So
Are
she
you a
didn't
bad
ask,
guy?
and mostly people
Dale
almost
either.
smiled. But tonight,
I've been called
something
worse,
sat wrong
but
in
no.
her chest.
I'm just a
A
guy
weight
who's
that had
also
been
wet
building
and
for 3
wondering why you're
days.
walking alone.
Ever since May had
I walk
handed
home
her an
every day.
envelope
It's only 4
that came
blocks.
to the diner with
She
her
wiped
name
rain
on it.
from her eyes.
No return
Mama's
address.
at work.
No stamp.
4 blocks is a
Someone
long
had
way
put
in
it
this.
in the mail slot by
She shrugged.
hand.
A gesture
Inside,
too
one
old for her
line.
face.
I know where
I've done
you
it
are.
before.
She hadn't
Dale
told
looked
May.
down the street.
Hadn't told anyone.
A few houses,
What would
a
she
church
say?
with a soggy
My ex-husband
banner
is coming,
announcing a
and
coat
when he
drive.
gets here,
A lot
the
of
law will
empty
be on his
sidewalk.
side.
No
because
one else
I'm
out.
the one.
No
Who
cars
ran?
passing.
She'd
Just a
packed
small
a bag
girl
for
in
Bree,
a torn
hidden
raincoat
it under the bed.
and a man who'd spent
She had
12 years avoiding
$340 in a
exactly
coffee
this
can
feeling.
behind the toilet.
The
She
specific
could be
weight
in
of a
Arkansas
child
by morning if
who
she
needed
left
something
now,
he might
but
be
she
able
was
to
so
give.
tired of running.
What's your name?
Monk
he
finished
asked.
his pie.
Lily.
Sat down
Lily
his fork.
Calhoun.
Jolene
Lily, I'm
refilled his
Dale.
coffee without
My
being
friends
asked.
call me Cutter, but you can
The
call
clock
me
above
Dale.
the register clicked
He
to
shrugged
midnight,
off his
and
leather
May's
jacket,
voice came
not
from the
the
kitchen
vest,
doorway.
the heavier one underneath.
I'm heading out,
and
Joe.
held it over both
You
of
good to
them like
close?
a tarp.
Yeah.
I'm
Go
going to
on.
walk beside you,
May
not
grabbed
behind
her coat,
you, beside
gave
you,
Monk a
where you
familiar
can see
nod,
me.
and the back door
When we get to your
wheezed
house,
shut
I'm going to
behind
wait
her.
at the sidewalk
The
until
diner
you're
felt
inside.
larger now.
That sound all
emptier.
right?
Just the
She
hum of the
studied him
refrigerator
again.
case and the tick
You're
of the
not
clock.
supposed to go with strangers.
Jolene's heartbeat
No,
doing
you're
something
not.
unsteady against
So
her
here's
ribs.
what we'll do.
She didn't know
You
why
walk
she
on that
did
side
it.
of the jacket.
Later,
I'll
she'd
walk
tell
on this
herself it
side.
was because
5
he
feet
was the
apart.
only person who'd
Anyone
ever
drives
asked for
by,
nothing
they'll see
from
us
her.
clear as day.
He came,
You can scream your
your
sat,
head off if I
he
do
left.
anything weird. No
And I
questions,
promise you
no
that
angles,
church right
no
there
hands
has
that
a
lingered
pastor
too
who
long
long
when she handed him
Her
his
name's
change.
Ruth. I've met her.
In 8 months
She's
of
meaner than
hiding,
she looks.
he was the closest
Something
thing to
shifted in
safety she'd
Lily's face.
encountered. Not trust.
She pulled the
She was
note
too
from
smart
her
for
apron
that,
pocket,
but
not the one
calculation.
from Travis,
A
but the one
decision
she'd
that
written
the math
herself
worked out.
3 days ago.
Okay,
sitting
she
on the
said,
bathroom floor
but
at
you have to
2
walk
a.m.
slow. I
while
have short
Bree
legs.
slept.
She'd written it
They
without
walked.
knowing who she'd
Dale
give it
held
to.
the jacket high,
Maybe nobody.
his arm already aching
Maybe just
from the
writing
angle.
it down would be
Rain
enough to
soaking
make
through
it
his
real.
shirt. She
Lily
slipped it
kept
under
her
his
5
check.
feet of distance,
Monk
glancing
looked
at him every few
looked at
steps,
the folded paper,
like she was checking
something
that the
passed
rules
across
still
his face.
held.
Not
They
suspicion,
passed the
not
church,
curiosity,
the coat drive
something
banner
older.
whipping in the wind.
He picked it up like
They
it weighed
passed a
more than
house with
paper
a
should.
foreclosure sign.
He read it
They
twice.
passed a yard where a
Jolene watched
dog
him
barked
read it,
once and
she
gave
felt
up.
stripped bare.
"That's my house,"
All her
Lily
careful
said,
walls crumbling
pointing
because
to a
she'd
small
done the
rental
one
at the
thing
end of the
she'd
block.
promised herself
Beige
she'd never
siding,
do again.
sagging porch.
She'd
and
asked for
eviction
help.
notice taped to the
Monk
front door
folded
that
the
Dale
note,
pretended
slipped
not
it
to
into
see.
his vest pocket.
He stopped at the
next
sidewalk.
to something that
"Go on,
glinted like
then."
gold in the
She
low
ran
light.
for the porch,
His
tried
jaw
the door,
worked
found
once,
it locked.
twice.
reached
When he
under
looked
a
up,
ceramic
his
frog
eyes
for a
were the
key.
color of a winter
Dale
sky
winced at that,
just
but kept
before
quiet
snow.
and let herself in.
This true? All
Before
of
she
it.
closed the door,
Yes,
she
sir.
turned back.
He put a 20
Thank
on the
you,
counter,
Dale.
stood,
Stay
and pulled
dry,
out a phone
Lily.
that looked older
The
than
door
Jolene's
closed.
car.
A light came on
"You
in
close
the front
up,"
window.
he said.
Dale stood there
"Don't
for
leave
a
until I
moment,
get back."
rain hammering
He
his
walked
shoulders.
outside, and through
Looking
the
at the
window,
eviction
Jolene
notice.
watched him dial.
14 days.
Watched his breath
The date
fog in
stamp
the
was
cold
12
as he
days
talked
old.
to someone she couldn't
He
see.
walked back to Keller's for his
Watched
bike,
him pace
but
beside
he
his
didn't leave
bike,
town.
one hand pressed
Jenna
flat
Calhoun
against
got
his
home at
chest,
11:47
like something
that
hurt
night.
there.
Her back
Then he made
aching
another
from 8
call,
hours of
and
stocking
another.
shelves and her feet
By
numb
Friday
from the
morning,
warehouse
Jolene had
concrete.
convinced herself
She
she'd
found
made a
Lily
mistake.
asleep on the couch.
She stood at the
TV
griddle
on
flipping
low,
eggs for the
a
breakfast
crayon
rush.
drawing clutched
3
in one
truckers,
hand.
a retired
Jenna
couple
turned off the
passing through,
TV, draped
and
a
old
blanket
Emmett
over
Walsh,
her daughter,
who came in
and
every
went to
morning
make
for
coffee she
biscuits
didn't
and gossip,
need but couldn't function
and she
without.
replayed the moment in her
The
mind
drawing
like a
caught her
film
eye as
stuck
she
on a
passed.
loop.
Purple
note,
crayon,
his
heavy
face,
strokes,
the
a
way
big
he'd walked
figure
out
with a
without
gray
promising
scribble for a
anything.
beard,
What had
holding
she
something
expected?
over a small
That a
figure's
stranger in a
head.
leather vest
Rain
would solve the
lines
problem
all
she'd spent 8
around
months
them.
running from? At the
That
bottom
was the
in Lily's
kind of
careful
thinking that
letters,
got
women like her
the
killed.
nice motorcycle
Trusting the
man.
wrong person, hoping
Jenna's
the wrong
blood
hope.
went cold.
She
Bree
was shaking
shaking
Lily
Lily
awake
awake
before
with
she
her
made
crayons,
the decision
working
to do
on
it.
another drawing.
Lily, yellow
Lily,
house,
baby,
green
wake
grass,
up. Who is
blue
this?
sky.
Who is the motorcycle
Always
man?
the same house.
Lily
Sometimes
blinked,
there was a dog in the
confused by the
yard.
fear in her mother's
Sometimes there
voice.
were flowers.
He walked me
but
home,
the door was
Mama.
always the
I was
same.
getting wet, and he
Bright
shared his
red,
jacket.
with a big lock
A stranger
on it that
walked
Bree
you
drew
home
with careful,
A man you
deliberate
don't
strokes.
know walked you,
Mama,
He
can
stayed
we
on
get
the
a dog
sidewalk.
someday?
He didn't come
Maybe,
in.
baby.
He said I
Someday.
could scream if he did anything
Someday.
weird.
The word
Lily's
tasted
voice
like
was
ash.
getting smaller.
Someday
the
meant
way
a
it did when
future
she knew she
Jolene
was in
couldn't
trouble,
see,
but
couldn't
didn't
plan
understand
for,
why.
couldn't promise.
I was just so
Someday
wet, Mama.
meant Travis
The
hadn't
umbrella
found them
broke.
yet, which meant
Jenna
someday
pulled her
was
daughter
already
close,
borrowed time.
heart pounding.
The bell
Mind
above the
racing
door
through every
chimed
morning,
at 9:30,
every news story,
and Jolene's
every
hands
reason
went
she
still on
taught
the
Lily
spatula.
never to talk to
But it was
strangers.
just May, and yet
Coming in
here
late,
she was,
with her reading glasses
safe,
pushed up on
dry,
her head,
drawing
and a manila
pictures of the
envelope
man
under
who'd
her
helped her.
arm.
Don't
Joe,
ever do
you
that
got a minute?
again, Jenna
They
whispered.
stepped into the back office,
Promise
and
me.
May closed the
You
door.
call Mrs. Patterson,
She set
you
the
go to
envelope
church,
on the desk
you wait
and
for me to
looked at
come get
Jolene
you.
with
You
the
don't
kind
go
of
anywhere with
expression
anyone.
that meant bad news.
He wasn't bad,
delivered
Mama.
gently.
He was just big.
My sister called
Jenna
this morning.
held her tighter
Linda
and didn't answer.
the one in Springfield.
She didn't
the lawyer.
sleep that night.
Jolene
She
felt
sat
her
at the
stomach
kitchen
drop.
table, staring
May,
at the
I
eviction
didn't ask you
notice
to,
she'd hidden
I
in
know
a
you
drawer,
didn't,
doing
but I'm
the
not
math
blind,
she'd
honey.
done 100
I've
times.
seen you flinch every
2
time a
days.
truck pulls in.
She had 2
I've
days
seen the way
before
you
the
watch
sheriff
the road.
came, and she
May
was
pushed the
$300
envelope
short,
toward her.
and there was no one
Linda
to call.
says if there's a custody
Her
order,
parents were
you're in
dead.
violation by being
Her
here.
ex-husband's
That's a fact.
family had made
But
clear
she
what
also
asking
says
them
if
for
there's
help would
documented
cost.
abuse,
The
there are
church
ways
had
to fight
already
it.
given her 2 months
Emergency
of
motions,
grace.
protective
The
orders,
drawing sat on the
things
table
that
in
take
front of
time
her.
and money, but things
The
that
nice
exist.
motorcycle man.
Jolene
Jenna
stared at
put
the
her head in her
envelope like it
hands
might
and
bite
tried
her.
to figure out what came
I don't
next.
have documentation.
Dale spent the
I have
night at the
scars that
Pinecrest
healed
Motel
and
on Route
stories
70,
nobody believed.
a place that asked
You have
no
hospital
questions and
records?
charged by the day.
From 3 years ago.
He lay on the
His
bed
name's
without
not on
sleeping,
them. I told
boots
them I
still
fell.
on, watching
May's
headlights
face softened
trace
with
patterns
something that
across the
looked like
water-stained
grief.
ceiling.
Oh,
His
honey.
phone sat on the nightstand,
know.
dark and
Jolene's
silent.
voice came out
There was a
harder
number
than she
in
meant
there
it
he
to.
hadn't called in 11
I know
years.
I should have said something.
His son Michael's.
I know I should have
And
pressed
some nights,
charges.
the weight
I
of
know all
not
the things I
calling
should have
felt
done.
heavier than others.
But you don't understand
Tonight
what it's
was
like
one of
when he's
those
standing
nights.
right there.
He pulled
and
out
he's
his
got
wallet
that look
instead.
in his eyes, and
Behind
you
his
know,
license,
you
folded
know
into quarters,
that if you
was
say
a piece
the wrong
of paper
thing,
so
you
worn
won't make
it
it
had
to the
gone
hospital
soft
this
as
time.
fabric.
She
He
stopped.
didn't need to unfold
Her
it to
hands
know
were
what it
shaking.
showed.
She pressed them
Crayon
flat
house,
against the
a
desk,
stick figure
and
with a
willed them
beard,
to be still.
a smaller figure with
May
yellow
didn't
hair,
say anything.
and the words
She just reached out
"Daddy
and
and
covered
me"
Jolene's
in crooked
hands with her
purple
own,
letters.
and they stood there.
His
in
daughter
the cramped
Becca had
little
drawn it the
office
week
with
before
its
she died.
outdated calendar.
She'd been 7
and its
years
couch
old,
that smelled
the
like
same
dust
age as
and old
Lily,
coffee.
give or take.
And for a moment,
Dale put the
Jolene
wallet
let
away
herself
and stared
feel
at
the
the
weight of
ceiling
someone
until
else's
dawn.
kindness.
By 8
Then
in
the
the
bell
morning,
chimed
he was
again,
back at
and
Keller's,
Jolene pulled
nursing
away.
coffee at the
I need Connor
to
and
get back
asking
out there.
questions he
Take
tried
the
to make
envelope,
sound
just
casual.
in case.
The woman who ran the
Jolene
register,
took it.
Deb,
The lunch rush
according to
came
her
and
name
went.
tag,
Bree
was the
ate
kind of
chicken
small-town
fingers and drew
fixture
another
who knew
house.
everyone's business.
This one with
and
the
wasn't
son in
shy
the
about
corner that
sharing
had
it.
a smiley
The
face.
Calhoun girl?
At 2 o'clock,
Oh, that's Jenna's
the diner
daughter.
emptied out.
Sweet thing.
And Jolene
Quiet.
was wiping down the
Deb
counter when
refilled
a
his
shadow
cup
fell
without
across
asking.
the window.
Jenna works
A
nights
black
at the
pickup
Harris
truck
Teeter
sat in the
warehouse
parking
over in
lot.
Apex.
Oklahoma
Moved here about
plates.
2 years ago,
Her whole
right after
body
her
went
divorce.
cold.
Keeps to
The
herself
truck
mostly.
door opened and Travis Breyer
I noticed
stepped
the
out.
eviction sign on her
He
door.
looked thinner than she remembered.
Deb's face
His
tightened.
face more lined.
Ray Nestor.
Like the last 8
He bought up
months
half
had
the
carved
rentals on that
themselves
street
into his
last year.
skin.
Been
He
pushing
wore a
people out
flannel
ever
shirt
since.
and work boots.
Wants to
and
tear
he
down
stood in
and
the
build
parking lot with
townhouses
his
from what
hands
I
in his
hear.
pockets,
Jenna's
just
the
looking
last
at the
holdout
diner.
on that block.
Just
She
looking.
leaned closer, lowering
Jolene
her
grabbed
voice.
Bree's arm.
Between you and
Too
me,
hard. She
that
knew it
man's
was
been
too
looking
hard.
for any excuse.
And pulled her toward
Late
the back
fees,
office.
code violations,
Stay here,
hearing
baby.
up, you name
Stay
it.
here and don't come
Marge
out until
Holloway,
Mama comes
2
to
doors
get you.
down.
Mama,
She
you're
had
hurting
documentation
me.
of
I'm
a leaky
sorry.
roof
I'm
she never
sorry.
fixed.
She let
But
go,
when she tried to
knelt
fight the
down,
eviction,
forced her voice
his lawyer
to be calm.
buried her in paperwork.
I need you to stay here.
She gave up.
Can you do
and
that
moved
for
to
me?
her sisters
Can
in
you be
Fayetteville.
brave?
Dale filed
Bree's
out
eyes
away.
were wide and frightened.
Anyone ever
but
take him
she
to court?
nodded.
File
Jolene
complaints?
kissed her forehead,
Marge tried,
closed the
didn't
office
go
door,
anywhere.
and
Deb
walked
shrugged.
back out to the counter.
Nobody around here has got
Travis
the money for
hadn't come
lawyers, and
inside
Nestor
yet.
knows it.
He was still
He
standing
finished
by
his
his
coffee,
truck,
left a
and
10
now
on
she
the
could
counter,
see his face more
and
clearly.
rode past the church on
The
his
dark
way out of
circles
town.
under his eyes, the way
The
his
coat
jaw
drive
kept
banner was
working
gone
like he
now,
was chewing
replaced
on
by a
words he
sign
couldn't
announcing
swallow.
Sunday services.
He pulled something from his
A woman
pocket,
in her 60s
looked
stood
at
on
it,
the front steps,
put it back.
sweeping
Then he
leaves
walked
that the
toward
wind
the door.
kept blowing back.
The bell chimed.
She looked up
He
as
stepped
his bike
inside.
rumbled past.
The diner was
He
empty
lifted two
except for the
fingers
two of
off
them,
the handlebar
and the
in
distance
acknowledgement.
between the door and the counter felt
Pastor
like
Ruth.
miles and inches
He'd
all
met
at
her
once.
once 3 years
Joe.
ago when the Iron
His
Horseman
voice
had
was
done a
quieter
charity
than she
ride through the
expected.
area.
Rougher.
She'd fed 40
I'm not
bikers
here
in
to
the
make
church
trouble.
basement and
Then
hadn't
why are you
flinched
here,
at a
Travis?
single tattoo.
I want to see my
He
daughter.
made a mental note and kept
The
writing.
words hung in the air
Jenna spent
between
the
them.
morning on the phone,
Jolene
working
felt her
through a
hands
list that
curl
got
into
shorter
fists
every
beneath
hour.
the counter.
The women's
Nails
shelter was
digging
full.
into her palms.
Legal aid had
You don't
a
have a
6-week
daughter.
waiting list.
You have a piece of
The
paper that
emergency
says you get
assistance
to
fund
visit
at
a
the
little
county
girl
office
you
required
terrorized for 4
documentation.
years. She didn't
His
have
face
time to
tightened.
gather.
That's
Every
not
door
fair.
she knocked on opened
Fair.
just enough to show
The
her
word
another
came out
wall
like a
behind
blade.
it.
You want to talk
By
to me
noon,
about fair?
She was sitting in
You
the
broke my
parking
ribs,
lot of
Travis.
Ray Nestor's
You dislocated
office,
my shoulder.
hands gripping the steering
You held
wheel,
me down
trying
and
to
told
talk
me you'd
herself
kill
into
me if
going
I ever
inside.
tried to leave.
She'd
And when I
avoided
finally
this.
did.
She'd
you
told
got a
herself
judge to
she could
say
figure
I
it
was the
out
one
without
in the wrong.
begging, without
I never
giving
meant
anyone power
don't.
over her.
Her
But
voice
2 days
cracked, and she
was 2
hated
days,
herself for it.
and Lily needed a
Don't you
roof.
dare stand there and tell me what you meant.
The office
I
was
know
a
what you
converted
meant.
house
I
on the
lived it.
commercial strip, the kind
Travis
of
was
place that
quiet for
tried
a
to
long
look
moment.
professional
When he
with
spoke
potted
again,
plants and
his
framed
voice was barely
motivational
above a
posters.
whisper.
Ray
I've been
Nestor
going to
sat
meetings,
behind a desk
anger
cluttered with
management.
files,
I'm trying to be different.
a phone pressed to his
Good
ear.
for you. Do it
He
somewhere
held up
else.
one finger when she
She's my
walked
daughter
in.
too, Joe.
Wait.
She's
and kept
afraid of
talking.
you.
She
I
wakes up
understand the
screaming,
timeline,
but
but
she
I
can't
dreams
move
about the night
faster
you
than
threw
the
me
county
down the
allows.
stairs.
The permits
She doesn't
are
draw
filed.
pictures of you,
Once the
Travis.
last unit
She
is
draws
cleared, we
pictures
can
of
break
houses
ground in
with locks
January.
on the doors.
A pause. Something
Yes.
moved across his face.
I'm aware of the interest payments.
Pain.
I'll
or
have the
guilt,
capital by the
or
15th.
something she didn't have.
He hung up and
Name
looked at
form.
Jenna.
with the
He reached
expression
into
of
his
a man
pocket
who already
again
knew
and
why
pulled
she
out
was
a
there.
photograph.
Ms. Calhoun,
Bree's school picture
what can I
from
do
2
for you?
years ago. The
I
one
need
with
more
the
time.
pigtails and the
She
gap-toothed
hated how
smile.
small her voice sounded.
He stared at it
I'm
like it was
300
the only
short.
thing keeping
I
him
can have it
upright.
by the end of the month. I'm
I just
picking
want
up
to see
extra
her,
shifts.
he said.
Nestor
I'm not
leaned
asking
back
to
in his
take her.
chair.
I just want to
He
see
was
her
younger
face.
than she'd expected.
For
maybe
one terrible
mid-40s,
moment, Jolene
with the
almost
kind of
believed
tired
him.
eyes that suggested
Almost
he
saw the
wasn't
man
sleeping
she
much
married,
either.
the one who'd been
A
gentle
framed
before he
photo on his
wasn't,
desk showed a
kind
girl
before
about
he was
Lily's
cruel,
age,
the one who'd
gap-toothed and
cried
grinning.
at their wedding.
The
and
notice
built
was
Bree a
filed 12 days
treehouse
ago,
and
he
promised
said.
her a
I
life
gave
that
you the
looked
full
nothing
14.
like this.
I know.
Then she
I'm
remembered the
asking for an
sound of her
extension.
own skull hitting
And
the
I'm
kitchen
telling you
floor,
I can't give one.
and the moment
I have
passed.
investors, Ms.
Get out.
Calhoun.
Joe,
Contractors lined up.
Get out of my diner,
The
Travis.
longer that
Get out, or
property
I'll
sits
call the sheriff.
occupied, the more it
He looked at
costs
her
me.
for a long moment.
It's my home.
Then he put the
It's
photograph
my
back
building.
in his pocket,
He
turned,
said it
and
without
walked out
malice,
the door.
just fact.
The bell
I'm not the bad
chimed
guy
behind
here.
him, soft
I've got a
and
business
final,
to run, same as
and
anyone.
Jolene watched
You
him
signed a
climb
lease.
back into his
You fell
truck and
behind.
pull out of the lot.
That's how it works.
She made it to the bathroom
Jenna
before
felt
her
the old
legs
anger
gave out.
rising. The
She
same
sat on the
anger
cold
that had
tile
gotten
floor
her
with
through
her
the
back
divorce,
against the wall,
through the
and
custody
she pressed
fight,
her hands
through
over
every
her mouth
moment
to keep the
someone with
sound
more
inside,
power
and she
had
shook.
explained to her why her
She was
problems
still there
weren't their
20
concern.
minutes later when she
She
heard the
wanted to
rumble of
scream at him.
motorcycles in the
She
parking
wanted to
lot.
flip his desk
One
over.
at first, then
Instead,
two,
she
then
did
more.
what she'd learned to
A
do.
sound like
She
thunder
swallowed
rolling
it.
in from the west.
Please,
Monk's
she
voice
said.
came through the
I have a
bathroom door,
6-year-old daughter.
low and steady.
Something flickered in
Jolene,
Nestor's face.
we need to talk.
His eyes
She
went to
wiped
the
her
photo on
face,
his desk,
stood up,
just
and
for a
opened the
second,
door.
before returning
There were
to
6
her.
of them in the diner,
I'm sorry,
men in
he
leather
said,
vests with patches
and he
and
almost
road
sounded
dust
like
on
he
their
meant it.
boots.
The sheriff
Monk
will be
stood
there
at the
Friday
front,
morning.
and
I'd
behind
recommend you
him,
start
a
packing.
younger man with
She
a
walked
scar
out without
across his
another word.
eyebrow was
That
staring at the
afternoon,
parking parking
Dale
lot
made
with a
3
troubled
phone
expression.
calls. The first
"That
was to
truck that
Razor,
just left,"
the Iron
the
Horseman's
younger man
president,
said.
who
"Oklahoma
listened
plates,
without
I know that
interrupting
guy."
and then asked
Monk
only one
turned.
question.
"What do you mean,
You sure about
Elon?"
this? I'm
"Travis
sure.
Breyer.
Then we'll
Worked
be
the
there.
rigs with my cousin
How many you
outside
need?"
Tulsa.
Dale
The
did
young
the
man's
math.
jaw tightened.
However many can
"He's
make it
not
by
someone
Thursday
you walk
night.
away
It's
from
not about
easy."
numbers. It's about presence.
Monk looked at Jolene.
I'll put out the
She
word.
saw the question in his eyes.
The second call was
and
to
she
Pastor
answered
Ruth.
it without him
She
asking.
remembered him from the charity
"He knows where I
ride,
work,"
remembered
she
his
said.
name, his bike,
"He knows where I live.
the fact that he'd helped
And
wash
he's got a
dishes
court order
afterward
that says
without being
I'm the
asked.
criminal, not him."
When he explained the situation,
The
she
diner
was
went
quiet
quiet.
for a long moment.
Outside,
Jenna's
autumn
grandmother
wind
was a
pushed
member
dead
of this
leaves across
congregation
the
for
parking
40
lot,
years.
and somewhere
Ruth
in the
said
back
finally.
office, a little girl
I
was drawing
baptized
a
Jenna
house
when
with
she
a
was an
lock on the
infant.
door.
She stopped coming
Monk
to services
reached into
after
his
her
vest
divorce,
pocket and pulled
too
out
proud to
something
ask for
gold
help,
on
I
a
think.
chain.
But
A
that
ring.
doesn't mean we stopped
A
caring.
woman's wedding
She
band,
paused.
worn smooth
What do you
with
need from me?
years. He
A
looked
place
at
to
it for a
gather,
moment,
and
his
maybe a
thumb moving
conversation with the
across the
sheriff
metal
about
like a
what's
prayer.
legal and what isn't.
"I made
I
a
can
call
do both.
last night," he
Come
said.
by tomorrow morning.
"To someone I
The
haven't
third
talked
call
to in
was the
2
hardest.
years.
Dale
daughter.
stood outside the
She works
motel,
at a shelter
watching
in
the
Kansas
sun go
City,
down,
helps
his
women
phone
in
heavy in his
situations like
hand.
yours.
The number was
He
still
paused,
there.
and his voice
Michael
went rough
Marsden,
at the edges.
his son.
She said she'd come.
32 years old
said
now,
she'd help.
if Dale's math
I don't
is
know
right.
if that means anything.
A lawyer
but I
in
wanted you to-
Charlotte. No.
According to the internet search
Jolene
Dale had
stared at
done
him.
last year,
You
and
called your
immediately
daughter?
regretted.
For me?
He didn't call.
I called my
He told
daughter
himself
because it was
wasn't
time.
the right time.
You just
that
gave
this
me the
wasn't
reason.
about him. That
He put the
dragging
ring
his
back
own
in his
wreckage
pocket,
into someone else's
and
crisis
Jolene
would
understood
only
that
make
she was
things
looking
worse.
at a man who
But
carried
standing
his
there
own
in
weight
the
of
fading
years,
light,
his
he
own
knew the
locked
truth.
doors, his
He
own
was
drawings
afraid.
of houses he couldn't
afraid
get
of what
back
Michael
to.
would say, afraid
He's
of
coming
what
back,
he wouldn't.
she said.
He put the
Travis,
phone away
he
and
won't
went
stop.
inside to plan.
Monk nodded.
Jenna was
I know.
packing boxes
That's why
when
we're
the knock
here.
came at 7
The young
that
man
evening.
with the scar
She opened the
shifted his
door
weight.
expecting
Monk,
Mrs. Patterson
if this
from
guy's
next
got the
door,
law on his side,
or maybe someone from the
then we
church
figure
with
out
a
how to change
casserole
that.
and a pitying
Monk's
look.
voice was iron.
She did not expect
Legal,
the man
clean,
from the rain,
but we don't
the
leave her
one Lily
standing
had
alone.
drawn in purple crayon.
He looked at Jolene.
Evening,
and she saw
Dale
something in
said.
his eyes she
He
hadn't
stood at
seen
the
in
edge
a
of the
long
porch,
time.
keeping his
Not
distance,
pity,
hands
not
visible at his
charity.
sides.
Faith.
My name's Dale Marsden.
Friday night,
I walked
he
your
said.
daughter home yesterday.
We'll be at the church lot
Jenna's
down the
hand
road.
tightened on
You
the
and your
door
girl
frame.
come there after your shift.
I know who you are.
We'll figure
Lily
this
told
out
me.
together.
I figured she
Jolene
would.
wanted to
Smart
argue.
kid.
Wanted to
He
say
didn't
she
move any
didn't
closer.
need anyone.
I'm not
didn't
here to
trust
cause
anyone.
trouble.
Had
I'm
learned
here
the hard
because
way.
I saw the
that
notice
help
on your
always
door,
came with
and
a
I think
price.
I might be able to
But
help.
Bree was in the back
I don't need
office,
help.
drawing houses
Everybody
with
needs
locks
help
on the doors,
sometimes.
and Jolene
Not from
was out of ways
strangers.
to run.
Her voice
Okay,
was harder now,
she said.
the wall going
Okay.
up. I don't know
The
you.
First
I don't
Baptist
know what
Church
you
of
want.
Cedar Hollow sat
And
on
I've
a
learned the
gravel
hard
lot
way that
at
when
the end
people
of Mill
offer
Road.
something for nothing,
Its white
there's
clapboard
always a
siding
cost.
gone gray with
Dale
age,
nodded
and
slowly,
its steeple
like he'd
listing
expected
slightly
this.
to the east.
That's fair.
Like it was leaning in.
You've got
to
no
hear a
reason to
secret.
trust me. He reached
Friday
into
night
his
brought a
vest
cold
pocket,
rain
and Jenna
that turned the
tensed.
lot to mud.
But all he pulled
and by
out was a
7
worn
o'clock,
piece of paper,
there were 14
folded
motorcycles
small.
parked in a row
He
beside
held it
the
up so she
fellowship
could
hall.
see.
Their
A
chrome
child's
dulled
drawing,
by the
faded
wet.
with age. A
Jolene
crayon
pulled
house,
May's borrowed car
two
into
stick
the lot
figures,
and sat
Daddy
for a
and
moment
me.
with the engine running.
I had a daughter,
watching the
he said
rain
quietly.
slide down the
Her
windshield.
name was Becca.
Bree
She
was in the
7
back
when a
seat,
drunk driver
clutching
ran a
the
red
yellow
light.
quilt and a folder
That was
of
12 years
drawings
ago.
she'd insisted on
He
bringing.
tucked the drawing back into his
Mama,
pocket.
are those the
I'm not trying to
motorcycle
buy
men?
anything, Ms. Calhoun.
Yes, baby.
I'm not trying to
Are
take
they
anything.
nice?
I just
Jolene
saw a little
thought about
girl
Monk's
walking in the
face when
rain
he
with a
read her
broken
note,
umbrella,
the way he
and she
pressed his
reminded me
hand
of
to
someone I
his
couldn't
chest,
save.
the way he'd
Maybe
called
that's
a
not a
daughter
good
he
enough
hadn't
reason,
spoken
but
to
it's
in
the
2
only one I've
years
got.
for a woman he barely
Jenna
knew.
stared at him.
I think so,
The anger was
she
still
said.
there,
I
coiled
think they're
tight in her
trying to be.
chest. But
They
something
ran
else
through
was
the
there
rain to
too.
the fellowship hall.
Something she didn't
and when
want to
Jolene
name.
pushed open the
I
door,
can't pay you back,
she found a
she
room
said.
full of leather
I'm not
and
asking you
smoke
to.
and the low
She
murmur
looked at the
of men
boxes
talking
stacked in the
serious
hallway,
business.
the crayon
The
drawing on
coffee
the
urn
refrigerator,
sat on a folding
the life
table
she'd built
beside a
from
plate of
nothing,
store-bought cookies,
about to be taken
and
apart
someone
again.
had dragged in a space
What exactly
heater
are you
that
offering?
glowed orange
Dale
in the
told
corner.
her.
Monk
Thursday morning
stood at the
broke
front of the
cold
room
and
with a
pale,
woman Jolene
the kind of
didn't
gray that
recognize.
promised more rain by
Mid-30s,
afternoon.
dark hair pulled
Dale
back,
met Pastor
wearing
Ruth at the
jeans
church
and a
at 7,
rain-spotted jacket.
before the town
She
had
had
fully
Monk's
woken.
eyes, the same
She
winter
led him
sky
through the
gray.
sanctuary to a
And when she
small
looked
office
at
in
Jolene,
the back,
there was no
cluttered
judgment
with
in
sermon
her
notes
face,
and food pantry
just steady,
schedules.
professional
A man was
attention.
already waiting there,
Jolene,
mid-50s,
this is my daughter
weathered
Carrie,
face,
Monk
a
said.
badge clipped
She drove
to
down
his
from
belt.
Kansas City this
Dale
afternoon.
Marsden.
Carrie
This is
stepped
Sheriff Tom
forward and
Avery,
shook
Ruth
Jolene's
said.
hand.
Tom,
Her grip was
this is the
firm,
man I told
her
you
voice
about.
calm. I
Avery
worked
didn't offer
With
his
the
hand.
Missouri
He
Coalition
looked
Against
Dale
Domestic
over with
Violence.
the practiced eye of
I've
someone
helped a lot
who'd
of women
spent 30
in
years
situations like
sorting
yours.
people into categories.
She glanced at Bree.
Pastor Ruth
who was
says you've
half
got
hidden
riders
behind
coming in tonight.
Jolene's leg.
That true?
Is there somewhere
Yes,
she
sir.
can sit?
Maybe 60,
This conversation
70,
might
could
be
more.
easier without little ears.
And they're planning to do what?
May had
exactly?
come too. She
Stand on
emerged from
public
the small
property.
kitchen
Bear
with a mug
witness.
of hot chocolate.
Make sure Ms.
and a
Calhoun
warm
has time
smile.
to explore her
Come on,
legal
sweetheart.
options before
I've got
she's put
crayons
on
and
the street.
paper in the back. You can show me your
Avery's
drawings.
jaw tightened.
Bree looked up at
You
Jolene,
understand that if Ray
uncertain.
Nestor files a complaint,
Jolene knelt down and
harassment,
smoothed the hair back
intimidation,
from her daughter's
trespassing,
face.
I'll have to
It's
act
okay.
on it. I
I'll
don't
be
have a
right here.
choice.
You go with Miss May.
We won't be on his property.
When they were
We won't
gone,
block access.
Carrie pulled out a
We won't
chair and
threaten
gestured
anyone.
for Jolene to
Dale
sit.
kept his voice
The
even.
room rearranged itself.
We've done this before,
Bikers
Sheriff.
settling onto
Veterans
folding
about to
chairs,
lose their homes.
leaning against walls,
Families getting pushed
forming a
out by
loose circle
landlords
around
who
the two
cut
women.
corners.
The
We
young
know where
man
the
with the
lines
scar,
are.
whose name Jolene had
you?
learned was Danny,
Avery
stood
pulled
near
a
the
folded
door with
paper
his
from his
arms
pocket and
crossed.
set it on Ruth's
Tell me
desk.
everything.
I ran your
Carrie
name
said.
this morning.
Start from the
Dale
beginning.
Marsden, also known as
So
Cutter.
Jolene told
Road
her.
Captain,
The
Iron
courtship,
Horseman
the
MC,
wedding, the first
assault
year that
charge in
felt like a fairy
2009,
tale.
Mecklenburg
Then
County.
the drinking, the
Dale felt
jealousy,
the air in the room
first
shift.
time he grabbed
Pastor
her
Ruth's
arm hard
eyes
enough
went
to
to
bruise.
him, waiting.
The
The
escalation,
charge was dropped,
shoves
Dale
that
said.
became punches.
I know it was dropped,
Punches that
but
became
if Nestor's
something
lawyer
worse.
finds this,
The
and
hospital
he will,
visits she'd
he's going to
explained
paint
away.
the whole crew as
The
a
night
threat.
he'd thrown her down the
Intimidation,
stairs while Bree
gang
watched
activity.
from the top step.
You're giving him
screaming.
exactly what he needs
She
to
told
make
her
this
about the
about
divorce
you
filing,
instead of
the
about
custody
her.
hearing. The judge
The
who
words
looked at
landed
Travis's
like
clean
stones.
record and
Dale
Jolene's
had
lack of
known this might come
documentation
up.
and awarded
He'd hoped
joint
it wouldn't.
custody. She
The
told
fight
her
in
about the night she
2009
packed
had
2
been
bags
outside a
and
bar
driven
in
east
Charlotte.
until she couldn't
A
drive
man who'd
anymore.
been beating his
About
girlfriend
the
in the
8 months
parking
of
lot.
looking over her shoulder.
Dale had intervened.
About the note that had
The
arrived
man had
3
pressed
days ago.
charges.
When she
The girlfriend
finished,
had
the
eventually
room was
testified.
silent.
and
Rain
the charges
drummed
had
on the
gone
roof.
away.
The space heater
But the
clicked
arrest
and
was
hummed.
still there.
Carrie's
A
face was
permanent smudge
unreadable.
on a background check.
You said you don't have
I can't change
documentation.
what's in that
no
file,
police reports,
Dale
no
said.
photos, no medical
But
records
I can
with
tell
his
you
name
that
attached.
if we don't show up tomorrow, Jenna
And
Calhoun
you violated
and her
the
daughter
custody
will be
order
on the
by
street
leaving
by
the state
noon.
with Bree.
Whatever Nestor's
The words
lawyer wants
landed
to
like
call us,
stones.
we're the only ones who
Jolene
came.
felt the room shift around
Avery
her.
stared at him
Saw
for a long
Danny
moment.
exchange a glance
Then he
with one
folded
of the
the paper
older
and
bikers.
put it back in his
Saw
pocket.
doubt flicker across
I'll be there
faces
tomorrow,
that had been set
keeping
with
the peace.
determination moments
You make sure
before.
your people understand.
I know
that
what I
means
did,
something.
Jolene said.
They will.
I know how it looks.
After
but I wasn't
Avery
going
left,
to wait for him to kill
Pastor
me in
Ruth
front of my
poured
daughter.
2 cups of coffee from
Carrie
a pot
nodded slowly.
that looked like it had been
I
sitting
believe
since
you.
yesterday.
The problem
She
is,
handed one to
belief
Dale
isn't
and settled
evidence.
into her chair
Right
with a
now,
sigh.
legally, you're in contempt
That could
of
have gone
court.
worse. she
Travis
said.
has
Could
grounds
have
to
gone
have
better.
you arrested.
Tom's
He
not
has
a bad
grounds
man.
to take Bree back
He's
to
just spent
Oklahoma
too many
tonight
years cleaning
if
up
he can
messes
find a
to
judge
believe
to
they
sign
can be
the order.
prevented.
So,
She sipped her
what are you
coffee.
saying?
I've been
Monk's
making
voice
calls
was
this
low
morning.
and controlled.
There's a legal
but
clinic
Jolene
involved
heard the
that
edge
the
in it.
Iron Horsemen
We just
supported
let him
a few
take her
years
kid.
back. Pro bono
I'm saying the
work
law
for
isn't on our
veterans,
side.
mostly.
Not yet.
I spoke to
The
a
room
woman
erupted.
named Sandra Chen.
Voices overlapped.
She's interested,
Anger,
but she needs
frustration.
documentation.
Men who'd
Anything
ridden
that
through
shows
the
a
rain to
pattern,
help,
and we're now
code violations,
being told there
improper
was
nothing
nothing
they could do.
Other tenants pushed out the
Danny
same
pushed
way.
off from the wall.
Dale
His
thought
face
of what
flushed.
Deb had told him at
This is
Keller's.
exactly what I was
Marge
afraid
Holloway.
of.
She had
We're
records
sticking
before
our necks
Nestor
out for
evicted
someone
her.
who's technically
Marge moved to
Danny,
Fayetteville,
but I've got
Monk's
her number.
voice
cut through the
Ruth
noise
set
like
down
a
her
blade.
cup.
I'll
The
make
young
the
man
call.
stopped.
You focus on
The
keeping
room
your
went
people
quiet.
steady. And Dale?
Monk walked to the
She
center
met
of the
his eyes.
circle, and Jolene
Whatever
saw
happened
the
in
weariness
2009,
his shoulders.
I don't need to
the
know.
weight of years
I've
and
been
miles
pastoring long
and
enough to
decisions that
understand
never
that the
got
distance
easier.
between a good man
He stood
and
there
a bad
for a
one
moment,
is
not
usually
speaking,
about 5
just
minutes
looking at the
and
faces
one wrong
around him.
choice. What matters
23 years
is
ago,
what you do,
he said,
with the years
my
after.
wife called me from a
Dale
payphone
didn't
in
answer.
Joplin. He
She
finished
was
his
crying
coffee
so
and went
hard
to
I could
prepare.
barely understand
The
her.
riders started
Her
arriving
sister
around
was
4
in the
that
hospital.
afternoon.
Husband
They
had
came
beaten
in
her
2s
half
and
to death.
3s, then larger
But the
groups.
sister wouldn't
Bikes
press
rumbling
charges.
down Main
Too
Street,
scared.
filling
Too
the church
ashamed.
parking lot,
And the
spilling
law
onto the
said there
grass.
was nothing anyone
Old
could
men
do.
with gray beards
He
and younger
paused.
ones with
The
fresh
rain had
tattoos
slowed to a whisper against
a few
the
women.
windows.
Road
3 months
worn
later,
and steady-eyed.
that woman was
They'd
dead.
come from Raleigh and
Her
Durham
husband
and
got 5
Fayetteville,
years for
from as
manslaughter.
far as Wilmington
Served
and the
2.
Virginia border.
Monk's voice
Razor
didn't
had
waver,
put out the word,
but his hands
and the
had
word
curled
had
into
traveled.
fists at his sides.
By 6 o'clock,
I've
there
thought
were
about
83
that
bikes
every
in
day
the lot.
since.
Dale
Every
stood on the
single
church
day.
steps and looked out
What I
at them.
could have done.
His brothers,
What I should
some
have
by
done.
blood and some by
The
choice,
law wasn't on her
and
side
felt
either,
the weight of what he'd
and I
started.
let that stop me.
Razor found him there
He
as
looked
the
at
sun was going
Jolene,
down,
and she saw
he was a
something
big
raw
man,
in his eyes.
bigger than Dale,
Not
with
pity,
a white
not
beard that
sympathy,
reached his
but
chest and
recognition
eyes that missed
The
nothing.
recognition of
You ready for
someone
this?
who understood what it meant
Ask
to
me
carry
tomorrow.
a weight you couldn't set
I'm
down.
asking now.
I'm not letting it stop
Dale
me
watched
again.
the riders milling
Danny
around the
shifted
lot,
uncomfortably.
checking their bikes,
Monk,
sharing
I
cigarettes,
hear you.
talking
But
in
if
low
we do
voices.
something illegal,
We're the
I keep
ones who
thinking
end up
about
in
what
cuffs,
happens if it goes
and
wrong.
That doesn't help her.
If
If
Nestor's
Nestor's lawyer makes this about
and
us
we don't do
instead
anything
of her.
illegal.
If the sheriff
Carrie
decides
stood,
we've
her
crossed a
voice
line,
cutting through the tension.
then we deal with it.
But there are things
Razor
we can
clapped
do.
him on the shoulder.
First,
we've
Jolene,
been in tighter
is
spots.
there any evidence
Remember
at all?
Asheville?
Anything
08?
you might have forgotten?
That was different.
Text
That
messages,
was our
voicemails,
own.
anything.
This woman doesn't even want our help.
Jolene shook her head.
She will.
Then she stopped.
Razor's voice was
The
certain.
phone.
When
She
she
turned
sees
it
what
off
showing
8
up
months
looks
ago,
like,
the night
she
she
will.
left. Shoved it in
But
the
Jenna
bottom of her
didn't come to
bag
the
and
church
never
that
touched
night.
it again.
Dale had
because she was
expected
afraid
her
he'd
to,
track her with
had
it.
hoped she would,
Afraid of what
at
she'd
least,
see if she turned
to
it
see
on.
what was gathering
But
on her
before
behalf.
she'd left,
Instead,
in the weeks before,
there was only
when
silence
she
from
was
the little
planning,
house
when
on
she was
Main Street.
terrified.
She
She'd
told
saved
herself it
things.
was fine.
Screenshots
He told
of
himself
texts,
she needed time.
A voicemail he'd left at 3
At
a.m.
9 o'clock,
drunk,
his phone
telling
rang,
her
a
exactly
number
what
he
he'd
didn't
do
recognize.
if she ever tried to leave.
Mr. Marsden,
She'd saved them,
this is
thinking
Sandra
someday she
Chen
might
from
need
the
proof.
Triangle Legal Clinic.
Then she'd forgotten
Pastor Sister Ruth gave me your
or
number.
tried to forget.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
My
you for
old
calling.
phone, she said.
I've reviewed what
It's in my
Marge
room.
Holloway sent
I
over.
turned it off when
There's
I
a
left.
pattern
But there
here.
might be
Deferred maintenance,
I saved some
fabricated
things
code violations,
before.
notices that
Carrie
don't
leaned
meet
forward.
statutory requirements.
What kind of things?
If Jenna
Texts,
Calhoun is
a
willing to
voicemail.
file a
He
formal
was drunk,
complaint,
he said.
I can get an emergency
She
stay
stopped,
by morning.
swallowed.
But I need her
He said
signature.
he'd cut my
and I
throat.
need it tonight.
He said he'd make sure nobody ever
Dale's
found
grip
me.
tightened on the
The
phone.
room went still.
I'll get
Danny's
it.
face had changed.
He rode
the doubt
to
replaced by
Maynard
something
Street
harder,
alone,
colder. Leaving the noise of
Can
the
you get that
gathering
phone tonight?
behind. Carrie asked.
The
house was dark,
Yes.
except for
Then
a
get it.
single light
Bring
in the
it.
kitchen.
Back here.
He knocked and waited.
If those messages
Jenna
are still
opened
there,
the door.
we might have something
She looked
to work
like
with.
she hadn't slept.
She
Eyes
turned to the
shadowed,
room.
hair pulled back.
In the meantime, I need
arms
to make some
crossed
calls.
tight over her chest.
My office has contacts
Behind
with
her,
family
Dale
court
could see
judges
Lily
in
at the
3
kitchen
states.
table, drawing with
And May,
crayons.
your
Miss
sister is a
Calhoun, I
family
need you
law
to come with
attorney,
me.
right?
There's a lawyer.
May had appeared
I heard
in
the
the doorway.
bikes. Bree
Her
voice
voice
was
was
flat. The
Linda,
whole town heard
she's
the
in
bikes.
Springfield.
Do you have any
Can you
idea what
call
you've
her?
done
Tonight?
I'm trying to help.
Already did.
You're trying
She's
to make
driving up
yourself
tomorrow
feel
morning.
better.
Some
Something
words
shifted
came out
in the room.
sharp.
edged with
current of
something that
energy,
had been building
purpose
for
replacing
years.
paralysis.
You think I don't know how this
Monk
works?
was making a list
A bunch
on
of
the back of
bikers
the church
show up,
bulletin.
make a lot of noise.
Two of the older
and then
bikers
what?
were on their
They
phones,
leave,
speaking
They
in
go back
low
to their
voices.
lives. And
Danny
I'm
had
still
uncrossed
here
his arms
with a daughter to
and was
raise,
listening to
and a
Carrie explain
landlord
something
who's
about
going to make
emergency
my life
protective
hell for
orders.
the next 10 years.
Jolene stood
because
in
I
the middle of it
embarrassed
all,
him in front of the
watching
whole
these
county.
strangers organize themselves
That's not-
around her problem.
I've been the
like it
charity
was their
case
own.
before, Mr. Marsden.
She didn't understand
I've
it,
been the one
didn't know
people
how to
help
hold
so
it.
they can feel good
For
about
8 months,
themselves.
she'd been
My
alone with her
ex-husband's
fear,
family paid
and
for
now
my wedding
suddenly
dress,
she
and
wasn't.
they never let me
The
forget
relief
it.
was so
They
overwhelming
paid for
it felt
Lily's
like
crib,
drowning.
and they used
Bree
it as
tugged at
leverage
her
in the
hand.
custody hearing.
Mama, I
every
made you a
gift came
picture.
with strings.
Jolene
Every
looked
kindness
down.
came with a bill.
Bree was holding up a
She
drawing.
was shaking now.
The yellow
and
house
Dale
again.
realized it was
With
its
anger.
red door and
It
its
was
big
fear.
lock.
But
I
this
can't afford
time,
to owe anyone
there was
else.
something
I can't
new.
afford to be grateful
In front of
anymore.
the house, a row of motorcycles.
Dale stood on the
and standing
porch,
beside
the
them,
night
cold
stick
around
figures
him,
in black
and
vests,
felt the whole plan
arranged in a line
unraveling.
like a fence.
83
That's
riders
the
in the church
motorcycle
parking
men,
lot.
Bree said.
A lawyer waiting
They're guarding
for a
the house,
signature,
so
a
nobody
sheriff
bad can get in.
watching for any excuse to
Jolene
shut
knelt
it down
down and pulled her daughter
and the one
close,
person it was all
breathing
for,
in the smell of
telling him to
crayons
leave.
and hot chocolate.
Mama,
and something
Lily
that
appeared
felt
in the doorway,
impossibly
purple
like
crayon
hope.
still in her hand.
That's beautiful,
She
baby.
looked up at Dale
she
with those
whispered.
clear,
That's
assessing
exactly
eyes.
right.
Hi, Dale.
Outside,
Lily.
the rain had stopped.
Are those your
The
friends?
clouds were breaking
With the
apart,
motorcycles?
and through the fellowship
He
hall
nodded.
window, Jolene could
It came
see
a
the
long
first
way to
stars
help your
appearing
mama.
in the clearing sky.
Lily looked at her mother.
Tomorrow,
Linda
like
would
you helped
arrive.
me in the rain.
Tomorrow,
they'd
Jenna's
see what
face
was on the
crumpled.
phone.
She
Tomorrow,
turned away.
Travis
One
would still
hand
be
pressed
out
to
there,
her mouth,
and the law
and
would
Dale
still be
saw the
uncertain,
moment the
and
wall
nothing
began to
would be
crack.
simple or safe.
Not falling, not yet.
But tonight,
but
Bree
fracturing
was drawing
along
motorcycles
lines that had
around
been
her
there
all
all
along.
along. Ms.
Tonight,
Calhoun,
a room full of
he kept his
strangers was
voice low.
fighting for her.
I'm not
And
asking
tomorrow,
you to trust me.
for the first
I'm not
time in
asking
8
you to
months,
owe me anything.
Jolene wasn't
I'm
going
asking
to
you
run.
to sign a piece of
She
paper
was going to
so a
stand.
lawyer can buy you one
Saturday
more day.
morning broke
That's
cold
all.
and clear.
One day.
The kind of autumn
What
day
you
that
do with it
smelled
after
like wood
that is
smoke
up to you.
and dying leaves.
Jenna stood with
Jolene
her
had
back
been
to
awake
him,
since 4,
shoulders rigid.
sitting at the small
Lily
table
reached
in her
out and
rented
took her
room
mother's hand.
while Bree slept.
He stayed on the
Staring
sidewalk,
at the
Mama.
cracked phone
He
she'd
kept the
pulled from the
rules.
bottom of her bag.
A long
She
silence.
charged it
Then
overnight.
Jenna turned around,
her hands shaking
wiping
as she
her
plied
eyes
it
with the
in,
back of her hand.
half expecting it
One
to
day,
explode
she
or
said,
scream,
and then
or
you
somehow
leave,
summon
all of
Travis
you.
through the walls.
You leave,
but
and
it
you
had
let
just
me handle
blinked
what
to
comes
life,
next.
slow
That
and
deal.
ordinary. She
Loading
signed the
8
paper at
months
the
of
kitchen
messages
table.
she'd been
her
too
hands
afraid
steady
to
despite
read.
everything. The texts
Dale
were
took the
there.
photo on.
Dozens
His
of
phone
them,
escalating
and sent it
from
to
plead or
sanding
chin
to threatening.
by
to
10
something
o'clock,
that barely
the
sounded
emergency
human.
stay was filed.
You think you
By
can
11,
hide
Sheriff
from me?
Avery had confirmed
I will
it was
find
legal.
you. I will find
Dale
her.
rode back to the
And
church
when I
parking
do,
lot, where
you're going to
83
wish you'd
riders
never
were
been
waiting in the
born.
dark.
And
He
the
cut his
voicemail
engine and sat for a moment.
3 minutes,
looking
and
at the
47
glow of
seconds
cigarettes,
of Travis's
the gleam
voice,
of chrome,
slurred with
the
whiskey,
shapes of men and
describing
women
in
who had driven
precise
hours
detail
to stand
what
beside
he
a
was going to
stranger.
do to her when he found
Tomorrow,
her.
they
She'd
would line
listen
the
to it
street in
once,
front of a house
in the
they'd
gray
never
light before
seen
dawn,
for a woman who
and then
didn't want them
she
there.
had to put the phone
Tomorrow,
down and press
they
her
would
face
palm whatever
against her
Ray
eyes
Nestor and his
until the
lawyers
shaking
decided to
stopped.
throw at them.
By 8 o'clock,
Tomorrow, Linda
anything
Chen
could
had
happen.
arrived from Springfield.
But tonight,
a
there
small
was
woman
this,
in her 50s with
the rumble
silver
of
streaked
engines
hair,
settling into
the kind of
silence,
calm that
the
came
murmur
from
of
decades
voices
of
making
walking into
plans.
courtrooms. And somewhere
She
in the
sat
dark,
at May's
a
kitchen
6-year-old
table with
girl
Carrie, who believed that
two of them
keeping your
passing
word
the phone back
meant
and forth,
something.
making notes.
Dale
Speaking
pulled out
in
his
the
phone,
low, urgent tones
scrolled
of
to a
people
number
who
he
knew
hadn't
exactly
dialed
how
in
bad
11
things
years,
were,
and
his
exactly
thumb
what to do
hovered
about
over
it.
the call button.
This is enough,
Not
Linda
yet,
said finally.
he told himself.
The voicemail
Not
alone
yet.
is enough.
He
We
put
can
the phone
file
away
for
in
an
emergency
emergency
protective
protective
order
order this morning.
Friday
I know a
morning
judge in
arrived
Taney
with the
County who
smell of
handles
rain
these.
still hanging in the
She's
air,
seen cases like
though
this
the
before.
clouds had thinned
If
to
we
a
move
pale
fast,
wash of
we
gray.
can have temporary custody
Dale was awake
transferred to
before dawn,
Jolene by this
standing
afternoon.
in the church parking lot.
What about the contempt
with a cup of
charge?
coffee
Jolene
gone cold
asked.
in his hand.
She was standing by the
watching
window,
sky
watching the
lighten
street,
over the
unable to
rooftops
sit
of
still.
Garner.
I
Riders
violated
had
the
slept
custody
in the
order.
fellowship hall
That doesn't
on
just go
pews
away
in their bedrolls
No, it
on
doesn't.
the grass.
But
Now they
context
were
matters.
stirring, stretching,
You fled
checking
because
their
you were in
bikes.
danger.
The
This
air
evidence
hummed
proves that.
with quiet purpose.
Any
reasonable judge will take that into account.
7:15, they rode.
Linda paused.
83
choosing her
motorcycles
words
moving through a
carefully.
small town. Make
There
a
may
sound
still
you
be
feel in your
consequences.
chest before
A
you hear it
fine,
with your ears.
maybe.
They came down
Court-ordered
Main Street in
mediation,
formation,
but you
2
won't
by
lose
2,
three, and
a
you won't
river
go
of
to jail.
chrome and
Not
leather
with this.
flowing toward
Jolene
Maynard Street.
nodded, but
Shop
she couldn't
owners
quite
came
make
out to
herself
watch.
believe it.
A woman
8
with a
months of
stroller
running
stopped
taught
on the
her that
sidewalk
hope was a
her
trap,
mouth open,
that every
An
time
old
she
man
let
on a
herself
bench
feel safe,
raised his
the
coffee
ground
cup and
crumbled
saluted.
beneath her feet.
They lined up along the
The
street
phone in
in front
Linda's
of
hands
Hannah's house,
buzzed, engines
a text
idling.
from a number
Then
Jolene
cutting off
recognized.
one by one,
I know you're
until
still
the
in town.
silence was
I'm coming
almost
to get my
louder than
daughter.
the noise had been.
Today.
Dale dismounted
went
and
quiet.
walked to the edge of the property
Carrie
line.
reached for her own
the
phone.
sidewalk, not the yard.
I'm calling the sheriff.
The others followed.
We need someone there
spreading
when he
out
shows
along
up.
the public right of way.
He hasn't done anything
A wall
yet,
of people
Jolene
who had come
said.
to stand witness.
The sheriff can't arrest
Jenna
him
was
for
on the
sending
porch.
a text.
Lily
No,
stood
but he
beside
can
her,
be present.
holding her mother's
Witness
hand.
what happens.
Neither
That
of them
matters
moved.
legally.
At 7:45,
Carrie was already
Ray Nestor's
dialing.
car pulled up,
And we won't be
He
alone.
got out slowly,
By
taking
10
in the
o'clock,
scene. The church
bikes,
parking
the
lot had
riders,
filled
the
again.
cameras that had appeared
Word
from
had
somewhere.
spread through the
Dale
club
spotted
overnight.
Deb from
Not a
Keller's
call
with
to
her phone
arms,
raised,
but a call
but
to
recording.
witness.
A second
23
car
riders
behind
had
him,
come
from
a
as
silver
far as
sedan
Branson
with a
and
man in a
Joplin,
suit
and
who
the
happened to be a
Arkansas
lawyer.
border.
Nestor
And they
walked
stood in
toward the
loose
house,
clusters
then
around
stopped
the
when he
lot,
saw the line
drinking
of riders
coffee
blocking
from
the
paper
sidewalk
cups and
not
speaking
blocking,
in low voices,
occupying.
They weren't there to
There was
fight.
a path through.
They were there
if
to
he
be
wanted
seen.
to take it. But he'd have to
Jolene
walk
stood
past
on the
them.
church
He'd have to
steps
look
with
at them.
Bree beside her.
Sheriff Avery's
The yellow
cruiser
quilt
rolled
wrapped
up
around the
a
little girl's
moment
shoulders
later.
like armor.
He got out and
May
stood
was
by
there,
his car,
and
arms
Linda
folded
and
watching,
Carrie with a folder
waiting.
full of documents.
Mr.
Monk
Nestor
stood a few feet
Dale's voice
away,
carried in the morning
his face
quiet.
unreadable.
We're not here to
his
cause
hand
trouble.
resting on the pocket
We're here
where
to
he
make
kept
sure
his
Miss
wife's
Calhoun
ring.
gets a fair
The
hearing.
black pickup truck appeared
Nestor's
at the
jaw
end of Mill
tightened.
Road.
He
at
turned to his lawyer,
10:47.
who was already on his
Travis
phone.
drove slowly,
This is
deliberately,
intimidation. Call
like
the
a man
sheriff.
who wanted
Get them
everyone to
removed.
see him coming.
They're on
He
public
pulled
property,
into the lot,
Avery
and
said,
parked at the far
not moving
end,
from his spot
away
by
from
the
the
cruiser.
motorcycles.
They're not
And for
blocking
a long
access.
moment, he
They're not
just
making
sat
threats.
there,
As far as I
engine
can tell, they're just
staring
standing
through the
there.
windshield at the crowd
Standing
that had
there
gathered.
with Nestor
Then he cut the
gestured at
engine
the
and
leather
stepped
vests,
out.
the tattoos.
He looked worse
the
than he
sheer
had
mass
2
of them.
days ago.
You know what this looks
Unshaven,
like.
hollow-eyed.
I know what it is.
Wearing the
Avery
same
said.
flannel shirt he'd worn
Citizens
at the diner.
exercising their right to
He
peaceful
stood by his
assembly.
truck and took
You
in
got a
the
problem
scene.
with that?
The
Take it up
bikers,
with the
the lawyers,
Constitution.
the sheriff's deputy,
The lawyer was
who'd
speaking
arrived
rapidly
20
into his
minutes
phone
earlier
now,
and
pacing
was now
beside
leaning
the car.
against his cruiser with
Nestor
his arms
stood alone
crossed.
in the middle of the street,
His eyes found
looking at the
Jolene,
house, at
and
the
something
riders,
moved
at the little
across his
girl on the
face.
porch,
Not
who was
anger,
watching him with those
something
clear,
older, more
serious
tired.
eyes.
He
Dale
started
saw
walking
the
toward
moment
her.
it happened.
The bikers
Nestor's
didn't move to
gaze
stop
caught
him.
on Lily.
They just
Really
watched,
caught,
a
not just
silent
passing
wall
over.
of leather and witness
something
as he
shifted
crossed
in his
the lot
face.
and
He
stopped
looked
at the
away
bottom
quickly,
of the church steps,
but not before Dale
10 feet
recognized
away.
the expression.
Close enough to see the
He'd seen
lines
it in
around
his
his
own
eyes,
mirror
the way his
12
hands
years
hung
ago.
loose at his
The
sides,
sudden,
the
unwanted
photograph
weight of a
Bree
child
visible
who
in his
wasn't
shirt
yours,
pocket.
but could have.
Joe, his voice was
Sandra
rough,
Chen's
scraped
car
raw.
arrived at
I
8
just want
o'clock
to talk.
sharp.
Then
She was a
talk.
small woman.
He glanced
with
at the
gray-streaked
crowd,
hair,
at the deputy,
and a briefcase
at the women
that
with
looked
their
like it had
folders
seen
and
100
phones.
courtrooms.
Not like
She
this.
walked past the
Not
line
with
of
all these
riders
people.
with a nod of
Yes,
acknowledgement.
like this.
Climbed the porch steps. and
Jolene's
handed
voice
Jenna
was
a folder.
steadier than she expected.
Emergency stay is
You don't
in
get to
effect,
have me
she
alone
said,
anymore, Travis.
loud enough
You
for
don't get to
Nestor
have
to
any
hear.
conversation that
The
isn't
eviction
witnessed.
is halted
That's done.
pending review of code
His jaw
violation
tightened.
complaints
I'm her
filed against
father.
your properties in Wake
You're the
County.
man who broke my ribs
I
while
have
she watched from the
documentation
top of
from
the
6
stairs.
former tenants,
Jolene
including
took a step
repair
forward,
requests that were
and she
ignored,
felt Bree's
notices
small
that
hand
failed to
tighten
meet
on her
statutory
leg.
requirements,
You're the man who
and
left me
evidence
a
of
voicemail
selective
saying
enforcement.
you cut my throat.
She paused.
I have it, Travis.
I also have a
saved
call
it.
scheduled with the county
And in
housing
about 2
inspector
hours,
at
the
9.
judge is going to hear
He's
it.
very interested
And then
in
we'll
the
see
state
what
of the
kind of
units
father
you're
the law
planning to
thinks you
demolish.
are.
Nestor's
The
face
color
went
drained
pale.
from his face.
This is...
You kept
can't
that?
just... I can.
I kept everything.
I am. Chen turned to
For
face
a
him
long
fully.
moment, Travis
Mr.
didn't
Nestor,
speak.
you have two
he
options.
stood at the bottom of the
Option
steps,
1.
and Jolene
We
watched
proceed
the
with the
war
review,
playing out
the
behind
complaints
his
become
eyes.
public record,
The rage
and the
fighting
county
with something
opens
else,
an investigation
something that
into
might
your
have been
entire
fear,
portfolio.
or might have been the first
Based on
crack
what
of
I've seen,
understanding.
that investigation will
I've
not
changed,
go well for
he
you.
said finally.
Option 2.
I told you.
You
I've been
withdraw
going to
the
meetings.
eviction,
I'm trying.
bring Ms.
Trying isn't
Calhoun's
enough.
unit up to code at your expense,
Jolene's voice
and we
broke,
all
but she
walk
kept
away without a
going.
lawsuit.
Trying
That's
doesn't
extortion.
undo what you did.
That's
Trying
the
doesn't
law.
give Bree back
Chen's
the years
voice
she'll
was
spend in
mild.
therapy.
You've been
Trying
operating
doesn't
as
make
if
you
it
stop
doesn't apply
flinching
to
every time
you.
a door slams.
It does.
She reached
The
down
lawyer
and
had
picked up
stopped
Bree,
pacing.
settling
He was
her daughter
watching
on her
Nestor
hip.
now, waiting for
Bree
instructions.
buried her face in Jolene's
The riders
shoulder,
stood
and
silent
Jolene
along the
felt the
sidewalk.
small body
Sheriff
trembling
Avery
against her
hadn't
own.
moved
You want to
from
be
his
different?
spot by the cruiser.
Then be different.
The whole
Get
street
help.
seemed to hold its
Real
breath.
help, not just meetings
Nestor
you
looked
go
at the
to
house
so you
again.
can tell a judge.
At the peeling
You're
paint
trying.
he hadn't fixed.
Stay away from us.
At the sagging
Let her grow
porch
up without
he'd
being
cited as a
afraid.
code violation.
That's what a father would
when
do.
It was his responsibility
That's what
to
trying
repair.
actually looks
At
like.
The little girl who was still
Travis
watching
stood
him, still
frozen.
holding her mother's
Behind
hand.
him, the
Mr.
bikers
Nestor
watched in silence.
Jenna's voice cut
The
through
deputy
the
had
silence.
straightened up.
She
His
stepped
hand
forward,
resting on
to
his
the edge of
belt.
the porch.
Carrie
and
had her
Dale
phone
saw
out,
her hands
recording.
trembling, but her
And then
voice was steady.
Travis did something Jolene
I've
didn't
worked
expect.
60-hour weeks for
He
2
reached
years
into his
to keep a
pocket
roof
and
over
pulled
my
out the
daughter's
photograph.
head. I've
Bree's
never been
school
late on
picture,
rent
the
until
one with
you
the
raised it
pigtails
twice
and
in
the
6
gap-toothed
months.
smile.
I've
He
reported
looked at
every
it for a
leak,
long
every
moment,
broken
his
fixture,
thumb moving
every
across the
problem,
surface,
and you've
the way
ignored
Monk's
every
thumb
single
moved across
one.
his wife's ring.
She took a breath.
When he looked up,
I'm not
his
asking
eyes
you
were
to feel
wet.
sorry for me.
I do love
I'm
her,
asking you to
he
look
said.
at what you've done.
I know
and
you don't
decide
believe
if
that,
that's who you want
but I
to be.
do.
Nestor
I believe
stared
you
at
think
her.
you do.
For a long moment,
Jolene's
no one
voice
spoke.
softened just
Then
slightly.
he turned to his lawyer.
But love doesn't look
How
like
bad?
what you did to us.
The lawyer hesitated.
And until you understand
If
that,
even half of what
really
she's claiming is
understand it,
documented,
you can't
and
be
it
part
sounds
of
like
her
it
life.
is,
I won't
you're looking
let
at
you.
fines, possible
Travis
loss of
stood
rental
there for
licenses,
what felt like
civil
hours.
liability.
The wind picked up.
The townhouse
scattering
project would
dead
be
leaves
delayed at
across the
minimum.
parking lot. At
Somewhere
worst,
a crow
the
called
investors
from the
pull
tree
out.
line.
Then he put the
Nestor
photograph
closed
back in
his
his
eyes,
pocket, turned,
Dale watched
and walked
him
to his
standing
truck.
there in the middle of the
He
street.
didn't look back.
A man
He
caught
climbed
between
in,
the version
started
of
the
himself
engine,
he
and
built
pulled out of the
and
lot.
the one he
The
might
black
have been.
pickup disappearing down
The photo
Mill
on
Road
his desk
until it was
the
just
daughter
a
he
speck,
saw
then
twice a
nothing,
month.
then gone.
The choices that had
Jolene's
led him
knees
here,
buckled.
one at a time.
She would have fallen
Each
if
one
Monk hadn't
small
been
enough
there,
to justify.
his hand steadying her
Withdraw
elbow,
it,
his
Nestor
voice
said.
low and gruff
The
in her
lawyer
ear.
blinked.
You did good.
Withdraw
You
the
stood.
eviction, fix the
She
unit,
couldn't
whatever
speak.
it takes.
She just held
He opened
breathed
his
tighter
eyes and
let
looked
the
at
tears
Jenna,
come.
and there was
Not
something
tears
in
of
his
fear
face
this
that wasn't
time,
quite
but
apology,
something
but
else,
wasn't far from it.
something that felt like
not.
release.
He stopped.
2 hours later,
Started again.
they were in Judge
I
Patricia
didn't set
Harmon's
out to be
chambers
this.
in
I just
Taney
stopped
County.
paying attention to what
Linda
I was
presented
becoming.
the evidence.
He
the
got in
texts,
his car and
the
drove
voicemail,
away.
the medical records.
The lawyer
Carrie had
followed a
tracked
moment
down
later,
from the
already making
Oklahoma
calls.
hospital.
The street
Records that
erupted.
told a story Jolene
Writers
had never
whooped
been
and
able to
clapped
tell
each other
herself.
on the back.
The judge listened.
Deb from
her
Keller's was
face
crying
grave.
and still
And
filming.
when the voicemail played
Pastor
through the
Ruth had
small
appeared from
speakers on her
somewhere
desk
and was hugging
Jolene
Jenna
saw
on
her
the
flinch.
porch. Lily
I'm
stood
granting
in
the
the middle of it
emergency
all,
protective
looking
order,
slightly
Judge
overwhelmed,
Harmon said,
until she spotted
temporary
Dale
full
at the Euclid
custody to
cover
Ms.
at the edge of
Breyer,
the yard.
effective immediately.
She walked over to him.
Mr. Breyer is
past the
prohibited
line of
from coming
riders who
within
parted for
500
her like
feet of
water
either the
around
mother
a stone,
or the child.
and stopped at the sidewalk.
We'll schedule a full
You
hearing
came
for
back,
next month,
she said,
but
I
based
said
on
I
what
would.
I've seen today,
You kept
I
the
don't
rules again.
anticipate a different outcome.
Dale felt something loosen
She
in
looked
his
at Jolene
chest,
over
something
the
that
top
had
of her
been
glasses.
knotted there for 12
You
years.
did the right thing, running.
I tried to.
I want you to know that.
Lily considered
The
this.
system failed you in
Then
Oklahoma.
she reached into
and
the
I'm
pocket
sorry.
of her purple
You're in
raincoat
Missouri
and
now,
pulled out
and
a
we're
piece
going
of
to do
paper,
better.
folded small.
Jolene nodded.
I made this
She
for
tried
you
to say thank you,
because
but
you
the
didn't
words
have an
wouldn't
umbrella
come.
either.
Linda squeezed
took
her
it,
hand.
unfolded
Carrie
it
was already
carefully.
on the phone with the
Purple
shelter in
crayon,
Kansas City,
heavy strokes,
arranging
two
for
figures
long-term
standing in
support
the rain,
services.
a jacket held
Outside
over
the
both their
courthouse,
heads.
the autumn sun was
At the
warm on
bottom,
Jolene's
in careful
face.
letters,
Bree had fallen asleep
Dale
in her
and
arms,
me.
exhausted
He couldn't
by a
speak.
morning.
She
He
stood
too
there
young
on the
to
sidewalk,
understand.
holding a
The
child's
bikers had
drawing,
dispersed
and felt the
They had
full
jobs
weight
and
of every
families and
choice
lives
he'd
to get
made,
back to,
and every
but
one
Monk
he
was still
hadn't.
there, leaning
Jenna
against
appeared
his
beside her
motorcycle
daughter
in the courthouse
She
parking
looked at the
lot.
drawing in Dale's hands.
Carrie's staying in town
then
for
at
a
his
few
face,
days,
he
and
said.
whatever she saw
Wants to
there
make sure
made
your
her
setup
expression
right.
soften.
Help you find
Thank
something
you,
more
she
permanent
said.
than that room above
I
the
know I made
hardware
it
store.
hard. I know I.
Jolene shifted
shook her
Bree's
head.
weight on her hip.
Thank you.
Why are you
You
doing
did the
this?
hard part yourself.
All of you.
You
I
stood
still
up.
don't
You
understand.
spoke.
Dale
Monk
folded
was
the drawing
quiet for a
carefully
moment,
and tucked it into
then he
his
reached
vest
into his vest pocket
beside
and
the
pulled
other
out
one.
the gold ring
That
on its
took more
chain.
guts than anything
His
we
wife's
did.
wedding band,
Maybe.
worn smooth
She
with
almost
years of
smiled.
being held.
But I couldn't have
Margaret,
done it alone.
my wife.
The writers were
She used to
mounting up
say
now.
that the only thing
Engines
that mattered
starting,
was what
the
you
rumble
did when
building
someone
again.
needed help. Razor caught
Not what
Dale's
you
eye
said,
and tilted
not
his
what you
head toward
believed,
the road.
what you
Time to
did.
go.
He
They'd
looked at
done
the
what
ring,
they
then
came
at
to
Jolene.
do.
I
Dale
spent
looked
2
at Lily
years
one
not
more
doing
time.
anything.
You take
not
care of your
calling my
mama,
daughter,
all right?
not helping anybody.
I will.
Just riding
She
and
lifted
feeling
her
sorry for
hand, a
myself.
small wave.
Then you slipped me
Bye,
that
Dale.
note, and I remembered
Bye,
who I
Lily.
used to be. Who
He
she'd
walked
want
back
me
to his
be.
bike, swung
He
his
put
leg
the ring
over,
back in his
sat
pocket
for a
and
moment
kicked
with
his
his
bike to
hands on
life.
the handlebars.
You didn't just ask
The
for
engine
help,
caught on
Jolene.
the first
You
try.
gave me a reason to give it.
Around him,
He
the
pulled
iron
out of the
horsemen
lot,
were forming
the
up,
rumble of his engine
ready to ride
fading
out
into
the way
the
they'd come
afternoon.
in.
And
His
Jolene
phone
was
was
stood
heavy in
there
his
in the
pocket.
courthouse parking lot.
Dale pulled it
with
out,
her sleeping daughter in
scrolled to
her
the
arms,
numbers.
watching
Michael
him go.
Marsden,
The wind
32
carried the
years
smell
old,
of wood smoke
a
and
lawyer
dying
in Charlotte
leaves.
who might or might
Somewhere,
not want to
a
hear from
church
the
bell
father,
rang the hour.
who disappeared into
for the
grief
first
and never
time
come
in 8
back.
months,
He
Jolene
pressed call.
breathed all
It
the
rang
way in,
twice,
all
3
the way
times,
out,
4.
and didn't look over her
Hello?
shoulder.
A
It
voice
wasn't
he
over.
barely recognized.
There would be
Deeper
hearings
than
and
he remembered,
paperwork and
cautious.
years of rebuilding
Michael.
what had been broken.
Dale's throat
Travis was
tight.
still out there.
It's your dad.
And the restraining
I
order
know
was
it's
just
been-
paper.
I know I don't have
And
any
some
right to
nights,
call.
She would
but
still
I'm in
wake
Garner,
up afraid.
about an hour from you.
But today,
and I
she
thought
had
maybe
stood.
he stopped.
Today, she
Tried
had won
again.
something that couldn't be
I thought
taken
maybe we
back.
could get coffee,
And tomorrow,
if you want.
she would stand
If
again.
you don't, I understand.
6
I
weeks
just-
later, the
I
first
wanted you
real
to know
snow
I'm
of
still
winter
here.
came to the
I
Ozarks.
never stopped being
It
here.
fell soft and steady
The
through
long
the night,
silence.
covering
The
the
riders were
brown
waiting,
hills
but
in
Dale
white,
didn't move.
muffling the
Dad,
world into silence.
Michael's voice cracked
By
on the
morning,
word.
Cedar
I've been
Hollow
waiting
looked
11
like
years for
something
this
from
call.
a Christmas card.
I know.
Smoke
I'm sorry.
rising
I'm
from
so
chimneys,
sorry.
icicles
There's a
hanging
diner
from
off
eaves,
I-40,
the
exit
steeple of
293.
First
I can
Baptist
be there in an hour.
standing crisp
I'll be
against
there.
a pale gray
He hung up.
sky.
The screen
Jolene
blurred,
woke
and
to
he
the
wiped
sound
his
of
eyes
Bree
with the back
laughing.
of his hand.
She lay still
Razor
for a
pulled up
moment,
beside him.
letting the sound
good?"
wash over her.
Dale tucked
It was
the phone
different
away.
from the laughter she
Getting there.
remembered. Lighter,
They rode out of
easier,
Garner in formation,
the kind of
the
laughter
sound
that
of
came
83
from a
engines
child who
rolling
wasn't
down Main
listening
Street
for
like
footsteps
thunder.
on the stairs.
Behind them,
6
a woman
weeks
and her
wasn't
daughter
long
stood
enough
on
to
a
heal
porch
everything.
that would be repaired by the
Bree
end of the
still
month,
had nightmares
watching
sometimes,
until the
still
last bike
flinched at
disappeared
loud
around the
voices,
corner.
still drew
Lily
houses
waved
with
until her
locks on
arm
the
got
doors.
tired.
But
Jenna
the locks
held
were
her
getting
close
smaller,
and didn't
and
let
the
go.
houses were getting bigger.
3 weeks
Their
later,
new place was
the
a
rain
rental
came back to
cottage on the
Garner.
edge of town.
It fell softer
2
this
bedrooms,
time, a steady
kitchen
November
with
drizzle
actual counter
that
space,
turned the streets
a
to mirrors
backyard with a
and
fence
brought the
that
smell of
Bree
wet
had already
leaves
claimed
through
for the
every
dog
cracked
she was
window.
certain they'd get someday.
Jenna stood at the kitchen
May
sink
had found it through a
washing
friend at church,
dishes,
and the rent
watching
was
the
low enough
drops
that
trace
Jolene
lines
could
down the
manage it
new
on her
glass
wages,
pane,
Plus,
Ray
the child
Nestor's
support
contractors had
that had
installed
started
the week
arriving.
before, court-ordered from
The house
Oklahoma.
looked different now.
She got
not
up and padded to the
transformed.
kitchen.
It was still
where Bree was
small,
standing
still
at the
old,
window in her
still the kind
pajamas,
of place that
breath
would never be
fogging
worth
in
much on
glass.
paper.
Mama,
But
look,
the porch no
snow.
longer sagged.
I see it,
The
baby.
leak in the bathroom
Can we build a
ceiling was
snowman?
patched.
Can we?
The
Please?
front steps had been
After
replaced
breakfast,
with
and after
pressure-treated
you
lumber
put on real clothes.
that wouldn't rot for another 20
Bree ran to
years.
her room, and
Nestor
Jolene
had
stood
kept
at the
his
window,
word,
watching
and
the
if he'd
snow
done it
fall.
grudgingly,
The
he'd
cottage
done
had
it
a view of the
thoroughly.
road. Jenna
She'd
supposed
chosen it
that
partly
was
for that
something,
reason,
so
she'd
she
seen
could
him
see who
once
was
since
coming.
that Friday morning.
Old habits
at the
died
hardware
hard,
store on Main
but
Street.
this morning
He'd
she
been
didn't
buying
feel the
paint
familiar
for his
clench in
daughter's
her
room, he
chest
said.
when a truck
Though
drove
she
past.
hadn't asked.
She just
They'd
watched
stood in the
snow
aisle for an
and
awkward
let herself
moment.
feel something
Neither of
close
them
to
sure what
peace.
to say.
The full custody
Finally, he
hearing had
nodded
gone
and
as
said,
Linda predicted.
"I hope things work
The
out
judge
for you."
reviewed the evidence.
She'd
heard
said,
testimony from
"You too."
Carrie and from a
And that had been
therapist
enough.
who'd evaluated
Not forgiveness,
Bree
exactly.
and made the
Not
temporary
friendship.
order permanent.
Just two
Travis
people
had
who
the right
seen
to
each other
petition for
clearly and
supervised
decided to move
visitation
on.
in 2 years.
Lily
He
came into
completed
the
a
kitchen with her
bachelor's
backpack,
intervention
ready for
program
school.
and maintained
She had a new
consistent
umbrella now,
therapy.
purple, to match
The
her
judge had been
raincoat,
clear.
bought with money
This was
from
a
Pastor
chance,
Ruth's
not a
Coat Drive
guarantee.
fund
Whether
that had
he
somehow
took,
become
it
a
was up to
general
him.
assistance fund for
Jolene
families in
didn't
need.
know if he would.
Jenna had
Part of
accepted
her
it
hoped
without
he'd
argument.
disappear,
She was
drive back
learning
to
to do that.
Oklahoma and never
It
look
didn't
back.
come naturally,
But another
and she
part,
suspected it
a
never
smaller,
would.
quieter
But she was
part,
learning.
hoped he'd
"Mama,
actually
can
do
I
the
show you
work,
something?"
not for her sake.
Jenna dried
for
her
his own.
hands and crouched
For the
down.
man he might have been.
Lily pulled a
if
piece of
something
paper
hadn't
from her
broken
backpack.
inside him long
Another
before they
drawing,
ever met.
this one more careful
She'd
than
heard
the others.
through the
It showed a
grapevine
house
that
with a
connected
fixed
small
porch,
towns
a
across
woman,
state lines,
and a girl standing
that
in
he'd
front of
checked
it,
himself
and in the
into a
distance,
residential
a
treatment
line of
program
motorcycles
in
riding
Tulsa.
toward a sunset.
60 days.
"It's for Dale,"
maybe more.
Lily said.
She didn't know
"For
if
when
it
he
was
comes
real
back."
change or just
Jenna
another
looked at the
performance
drawing
for
for a
another
long moment.
judge. But
"That's
she found
beautiful,
herself
baby.
hoping,
We'll send it to
against
him.
her better judgment,
Promise
that it was real.
Promise.
Not because
She
she
had
wanted
Dale's
him
address
back.
now.
That door
He'd
was
sent a
closed
letter
and
2
locked
weeks ago,
and buried,
handwritten
but
on
because
plain
Bree
paper,
deserved a
the
father
kind of
who
letter
was
people
whole,
used to send
even
before
if she never
phones
saw
made
him
everything
again.
instant and
That
forgettable.
was the bittersweet
He
truth
told her about
Jolene was
Michael,
learning to
about
live
the
with.
coffee
You
that
could
had turned
win
into lunch,
and still
that had
carry
turned
the
into a
weight of
drive
what
to the
you'd
cemetery
lost.
where Becca was
She'd
buried.
won her daughter's safety.
11 years of
She'd won
silence
her own
broken in
freedom.
an afternoon.
But she'd also
weren't
lost
healed.
the life she'd
He'd been
imagined
clear
when
about
she was
that.
22.
11
and
years
stupid
made a
with
wound
love.
that didn't close
The
with
life
one
where marriage
conversation.
meant forever,
But they
and
were
fathers
talking.
built tree
They were
houses and
trying.
nobody had to run.
Michael had
Some
invited him to
mornings,
Thanksgiving.
that loss
and Dale
felt
had
heavier
said yes.
than others.
"I don't know if I deserve
with the
any of
snow
this,"
falling and
he'd
Bree
written.
laughing in the
"I
next
spent a
room,
long time
it
running
felt
from the
almost
hard things.
bearable.
But that little girl of yours
Thursday
reminded
came,
me that
and
sometimes you
Jolene
have to
worked
walk
the
toward
evening
them
shift at
instead.
Maze. The
Even when
diner
it's
looked
raining,
different in winter.
even when you don't have
The
an
neon
umbrella.
sign had been fixed.
Jenna had
The
read the
M
letter
no
3
longer
times
flickering,
before putting
and
it in
May
the
had
drawer with
strung
Lily's
Christmas
drawings.
lights along the windows.
She wasn't sure
that
she
cast
believed in
colored
signs
shadows
or
on the
fate
snow
or
outside.
any of the things
The
Pastor
coffee
Ruth
maker
talked
still
about in
wheezed,
Sundays.
and old Emmett.
But she
Walsh
believed
still
in
came
this.
in for biscuits.
A man had stopped
and
in
some
the
things
rain
stayed
for
the
a
same,
child who
no
wasn't
matter
his,
how much else
and that
changed.
one small choice
At 11:30,
rippled outward
the
in
rumble
ways
of a
neither
motorcycle
them could
cut
have
through the
predicted.
quiet.
It
Jolene
hadn't
looked
fixed
up
everything
as Monk
Her
pushed
job
through
was
the
still
door.
hard.
Money
Stomping
was
snow
still
off his
tight.
boots.
Some nights
He looked different
she still
too.
lay awake.
Something easier in his
doing
face.
math in her head,
Something lighter
wondering
in
if
the
the
way
numbers
he
would
moved.
ever add up.
Carrie had
But
stayed
she
in
wasn't
Cedar
alone
Hollow for
anymore.
2 weeks after
She
the
let
hearing.
people in,
and in
they
that
hadn't
time,
asked for anything
Jolene
in
had
return
watched
except
the two
the
of them
chance to
circle
help.
each other.
That was
like
harder
wary
to accept
animals
than she
learning to
expected.
trust again.
Harder.
They'd
and
had
more
dinner at
important.
Maze. They'd
The Iron
visited
Horseman
Margaret's
had
grave
started
together.
something, Pastor Ruth
The first
told her.
time Monk had been
A
there
fund
since
for
the
families
funeral.
facing eviction
They'd
in
talked
Wake
about
County.
things that had been
Seeded
silent for
with
2
donations
years.
from the
And when
writers,
Carrie finally
matched
drove
by
back
a
to
grant
Kansas City
from a legal
Monk had hugged her in the
foundation in
parking
Raleigh.
lot for a long time.
Sandra Chen was on
He
the
still
board.
called her every
So
Sunday
was
now.
Marge Holloway,
Jolene
who
knew
had driven back
because
from
he told her
Fayetteville to testify
gruff and
at a
offhand,
county housing
like it
meeting
wasn't a miracle.
about her experience with
"Coffee?"
Nestor's
she
properties.
asked. "And
The
pie,
meeting had
if
led
there's
to
any
new
left."
oversight requirements,
She cut
new
him a slice
inspection
of apple,
protocols,
slid it across
new
the
accountability for
He ate
landlords who
slowly,
had operated in the
methodically,
shadows
the
for
way
too
he
long.
always did.
It wasn't a
But when he
revolution.
finished, he didn't
It was
just
the
leave
start.
money on the counter and go.
Dale hadn't come
He
back
reached
to
into
garner.
his vest pocket
He'd
and pulled
written
out a
that he
folded
might
piece of paper.
someday, when the
Bree
season
made this
turned
for
and the
me,
roads
he
opened up
said.
again.
Gave it to Carrie
But
to
for now,
give to me.
he was
last time
staying
she
close to
visited.
Charlotte,
He
close to
unfolded
Michael,
it, and
rebuilding
Jolene saw the
something
drawing.
he'd thought was
The yellow
lost
house
forever.
with the red door.
Jenna
But
understood.
the lock was gone now.
Some things were more
In its
important than
place,
keeping promises
Bree
to
had drawn a
strangers,
welcome mat
but she
and
kept his
flowers
letters,
in the windows
and Lily
and
kept
a
drawing
smiling
pictures
sun
for
in
him,
the corner.
adding them to a
The
folder that grew
motorcycles were
thicker
still
every
there,
week.
parked along the
Motorcycles
fence,
and rainbows,
but they weren't guarding
houses
anymore.
with smoke
They were
curling
just
from
visiting.
chimneys.
At the
A
bottom,
man with a gray
in
beard,
Bree's careful
holding a jacket
6-year-old
over a little
handwriting,
girl's head.
Thank you for
The
helping
school
my
bus
mama
horn
stand
sounded
up.
from the corner.
Monk looked at
Lily
the drawing
grabbed
for
her
a long
umbrella and
moment.
ran for the
Then
door,
he folded it
then
carefully
stopped
and
and
put it
turned
back
back.
in his pocket,
Mama?
next to the gold ring
Yeah,
on
baby?
its chain.
I'm glad he
She's a
walked
good
me
kid,
home.
he said.
Jenna
She
smiled.
is.
Me too.
He put a 20 on the counter.
She watched from the
stood and
porch
pulled
as
on his
Lily
gloves.
ran to the bus,
At the door, he
purple
paused
umbrella
and looked
bobbing in
back.
the rain.
Same time
The door
next week,
closed.
Jolene
The bus
smiled.
pulled away.
I'll save you a
Jenna
slice.
stood there for a moment longer,
bell chimed
letting
as he
the drizzle
left.
mist her face,
Through the window, she
thinking
watched
about
him
broken
kick his bike to
umbrellas
life,
and second
watched
chances
the tail light
and the
disappear
strangers
into
who
the
become
snowy
family
dark.
when you least expect
The
it.
neon hummed overhead,
Inside,
steady
the coffee
and
was
whole.
getting cold.
The coffee
There were
maker
dishes to
wheezed,
finish and a shift
somewhere
to
across
get ready
town,
for,
in a
and
cottage with a
100
fence
small
and a view of
tasks
the
that
road,
made up a life.
a little girl was
But for
sleeping
now,
under a yellow
she stayed
quilt,
on the porch,
dreaming of
watching the
houses
rain
with
fall
welcome
on a
mats
street that
and
looked
doors that
exactly the
didn't need
same as
locks
it had
anymore.
3 weeks ago,
Jolene
and
wiped down the
completely
counter,
different.
turned off
The drawing on the
lights,
refrigerator
and stepped
caught the
out
morning
into the
light.
winter night.
The nice
The
motorcycle
snow had
man.
stopped, and the
Jenna went
stars were out,
inside, poured her
sharp
coffee,
and
and
bright
got ready
against
for the day.
black. She
If
tilted
this
her
story
head
moved
back
you,
and let the
subscribe
cold
so you
air
never
fill
miss
her
one.
lungs.
And tell
Then
us
she
in the
walked
comments,
home,
has a
leaving
stranger's
footprints in the
kindness
fresh
ever
snow,
changed your
one
life?
step at a time.
We read every single one.
If this story